that are
Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem, Racha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is The Sons of Japheth Are Not in Their Lands Today. And pretty much, like I said, let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem, Racha Kodash. This is a video that was sent to me yesterday by the elder Apostle Tahar. Not this video in particular, but the video with this individual, Prince of Power, Sulaka, and it was featuring Bishop Nathaniel and Ron Dalton. And pretty much Ron Dalton was cornering Bishop Nathaniel on, trying to get him to say that the Edomite, I forget exactly how it went down, the Edomites, and, the Edomites would be Hebrews, and the Israelites here in America would be Hebrews, South America, the Indians, and however he put it. But the main point he was trying to bring out was that in the future prophecy of Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, he was asking the Bishop Nathaniel. Matter of fact, let me let you hear it.
Listed in Ezekiel 38 prophecy.
We believe that they're the Samoans, these islanders. Now, we can't say the people of Samoans are Ashkenazi or whatever. You can't, we don't know. If you go to the Middle East, you have Midianites, you have Ishmaelites, you have the sons of Ishmael, you have 12 sons of Ishmael. So those were 12 different tribes. You had Afghanis, which goes back to Elam, which they call Afghan people Arabs. They're not Arabs, they're Elamites. So you got to mix. That's why the white man, when he went to the Middle East, he called them Arabs. Arabs just means mix.
Yep.
He gave them one label, the mixed people. Some of them Midianites, some of them Ishmaelites, some of them what do you call it, Persians, which are Elamites.
Villages, a land where
he called them Arabs. Arabs just means mix.
Villages, a land where people are dwelling without bars nor gates, dwelling in and put are going to leave their land.
So we're not concerned about that.
See, which states in the future, in the latter days, that these nations, along with the descendants of Persia and Cush and Put, are going to leave their land, and they're going to come to the land of unwalled villages. Who are the descendants of Gomer, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, Togarmah?
And that's what I wanted to get. So Salakia for that. But you got some edification from the elder Apostle Tahar, going into certain other points. But that's what we want to get to, because he, I believe, I'm not sure if he says it in this,
that are listed in Ezekiel 38 prophecy.
We believe.
Yeah, Ezekiel 38 prophecy, which he believes that they're Japheth. Like he's trying to get Bishop Nathaniel to say who these nations are. And when you go to the book of Genesis, right, those land masses that you see in those areas that they call today so-called Europe, you had the sons of Japheth there. Genesis 10 and 2, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tyrus, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah. So as you see, and the sons of Javan, which this Javan is the land of the Greeks that the Greeks have now. Now, the peoples that are in these lands today are not the original inhabitants of those lands, because the original inhabitants of those lands were colonized and were pushed out of those lands, and the Edomites were the ones that came in there and took over. And it began during the time of the Greeks. When you go to Josephus, he tells you that when the Greeks started conquering lands, that's when they started changing the names of these different lands. Matter of fact, let me get that real quick in Psalms, and pretty much that they started giving them more Greek sounding names. When I'm not sure, I don't remember the exact spot or quotation in the Josephus, if it was Antiquity of the Jews or if it was War of the Jews, might have been Antiquity, um, where it says that, but it does say that the Greeks were the ones that changed the names of these lands, to sound so that the names could sound more Greek. All right. Psalms 49:11. Their inward thought is as dealing with Esau, the so-called white man, that their houses shall continue forever and their dwelling places to all generations. And they never think that they're going down. That's why they keep making plans for the future. 2050 and 20, the year 3000. They just make movies about the year 20 something, 40, 24 something, because they don't ever believe they're going down. They call their lands after their own names. So they call their lands after their own names. Like you see here in America, you have America is called by Amerigo Vespucci, which was a Italian, conquistador, conqueror, or a conqueror, that this land was named after his name. You have Columbus, Ohio, so on and so forth, right? So what they did was when they conquered those lands, known by the ancient names, in the regions of the sons of Japheth, they started changing those names. That's why today a majority of those places don't have their ancient biblical names, because the so-called white man came in there and conquered it. It's just like when you go back during the time of the Byzantine Empire, the Israelites were ruling, so-called Negroes. And I wonder if Ron Dalton knows anything about that history, about the history of the Byzantine Empire and how you had so-called black people ruling. Those kings, of France and, England and different other so-called European sounding or so-called European lands were ruled by so-called black men, and the images of the icons, that's even more proof of that. So the original people of that land were the Japhetic people. Then Esau came in during the time of the Greeks and the Romans, moved them out, put themselves in it. Then, during the time of the Byzantine Empire, Jake took over that land and pushed out those Edomites that were holding power positions in those places. You see? And then today, Esau, during the time of the Renaissance, reconquered all of that. Just like the Moors at one time had the majority of Spain, until these so-called Christians came in there and removed them out. You see? So there's been a lot of removing of landmarks. Matter of fact, let me get that real quick. This is the book of Job 24:2. Some remove the landmarks. They violently take away flocks and feed thereof. So they remove the landmarks. So if they remove the landmarks, that means that the peoples of those lands wouldn't be in these different lands that were given to them, because the lands were given to them as an inheritance, as we read in Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter and the 8th verse. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance. What was their inheritance? Their lands. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So all nations got an inheritance. We read in the book of Genesis, the 10th chapter, which they call the Table of Nations. It gives you a list of Noah's 3 sons and their children after them. All right. So yes, those lands that you call, Europe and these different names that they have today, they were inhabited by the children or the sons of Japheth, which Japheth himself was a brown-skinned man. All right. Even when you go to the history of the Minoan people, the Minoan people were brown-skinned people. All right. And, those so-called Japhetic people, or those Japhetic people, not so-called, the Japhetic people that were in those lands today, would be classified as the Polynesians. When you look at ancient pictures or drawings of, Etruscans, Minoans, you'll see that they have a similar look to those so-called Polynesian people. The dark brown skin, or the brown skin with the long flowing hair. Men and women both wear that's the same way. All right. So those people are not in those lands. Now you may have some of them, that you might still have a few here and there, but for the most part, those lands were conquered by Esau, the so-called white man, beginning with the Greeks, Alexander the Greek. So when you go back, okay, let's go back here. Let's go to Proverbs 22, and then we're going to make a couple of other points. Proverbs 22 and 28. Remove not the ancient landmarks which thy fathers have set. Why? Because all of those lands were given to those nations to inherit forever and ever and ever. But when Esau came in there, he started removing them out of their lands. Didn't he tell Israel not to go through the Edomites' land or the Moabites' land, because the Lord didn't give them any of those lands? Because you're not supposed to move the ancient landmarks. The only land that was removed of its inhabitants were the Canaanites, because that land was supposed to be given to us. After Ham did what he did, and his father didn't curse Ham, Noah didn't curse Ham, he cursed Canaan. And eventually what happened? The Canaanites, the lands that they had, were really pretty much for us. And the Lord had them in those lands prior to us getting there, and they cultivated the land. They made everything, livable, so to speak. So then when we came in there, all we had to do was take them out and take over those lands and inhabit those lands, because they were rightly ours to begin with. So you're not supposed to remove ancient landmarks. All right. Now, when we go to Ezekiel 38 and 6, these are some of the nations that are going to be in league with Gog, which is Russia. Gog, Magog. Magog is the land. Gog are the people. Magog means of Gog, and that's the land of the so-called Russians today, which would be up in the northern quarters. And when you look at a map, right, you'll see the Caspian Sea here, you see the Black Sea here, you see the Caucasus Mountains here, and they have Magog here. All right. So the ancient Magogites, for lack of better words, were Japhetic people. They were brown-skinned people. They were not white people. All right. You have Gomer, as they have here, Togarmah, Meshach, and Tubal. And different maps put them in slightly different locations. But for the most part, we're going to deal with this map, right? And in this map, you have Gomer, Togarmah, Meshach, and Tubal. This land right here that it's on is known as Turkey. You have some over here kind of bordering into Armenia, right? So this is Turkey. Now, the land of Turkey itself, this region here, was not called Turkey always. This region here was known by its ancient area of Anatolia. All right. So Anatolia later on became known as Turkey. Turkey was named Turkey in roughly around 1922 because it was during the 15th century, mid 15th century, 1453. You had the Christian eastern capital of Constantinople, which was governed by so-called black men. Constantine's descendants, I believe that was Constantine the 13th, if I'm not mistaken. You had an onslaught, and you had a pretty much a takeover of lands by this horde of Muslims that were pushing heavy at this point. They were pushing heavy that Islamic spirit. So you had the regular Arabs that go back to Ishmael and those other tribes, right? You had the Moors, which were Israelites that converted to Islam, and then you had the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks were so-called white people that converted to Islam, and that's why Turkey is named Turkey today, because it goes back to the Turkish people that conquered this land. Now, when did they conquer this land? They conquered this land in 1453 when Mehmet II, which was a sultan of the Ottoman Empire, made war against Constantinople, and I believe that was Constantine the 13th, if I'm not mistaken. And when he finally won, he had a hard time, but when he finally won that stronghold, that's when Constantinople became Istanbul, right? And Istanbul, which was the new capital, was run by Ottoman Turks, not the original people of Japheth that were there. Because by the time the 1400s came and the Byzantine Empire, the Japhetic people were long gone out of there. That was way after the Greeks. That was way after the Romans, which removed the original Japhetic people out of those lands and took over those lands. You see? That's why the Greeks and the Romans and all, they don't have their ancient names from the past, which are Edomites, because they took on the customs and the religions and the identities of these nations. Just like, I know Ron Dalton doesn't believe that them small hats, the so-called white people that call themselves Israel or Jews, are the original Israelites, right? And they're not in their land today, unless he believes that those small hats are the people. Because if that's the case, then why would you write a book called From Hebrews to Negroes? You see? So there's been a lot of removing of the original peoples of these lands. Togarmah, Gomer, Meshach, and Tubal, right? Now, another example is the land of Egypt today. The land of Egypt was ruled originally by Mizraim, Matazarium, right, which are the so-called Egyptians, which the word Egypt came from the Greeks. They called it Egypt. They removed the name Mizraim when they took over those lands and called it Egypt, right? The original inhabitants, which were the so-called Egyptians, Mizraim, they were dark-skinned people. Then during the time of the Greeks, when they took over, then the so-called white man was ruling and governing that area. You had the pharaohs at that time, from around the 300 some odd BC on down. All right, they were so-called white people that were ruling Egypt, but were they the original Egyptians? No. Then after them, later on in the history, when Islam started becoming prevalent, you had the Ishmaelites, which are the so-called Arabs. When they were conquering the world in the name of Islam, they went down into Egypt and removed those so-called white pharaohs out of the way, and they put themselves in it. That's why today, when you go to the land of Egypt, you see so-called Arab-looking people. Those are not the original inhabitants of that land. When you come to America, the original inhabitants of America were the so-called Native American Indians, the so-called Seminole Indians, the so-called Mexican Indians, so on and so forth. The so-called white man conquered this place, renamed it America. Now they're running it. And there's many, many examples over and over and over again. So the people of Japheth are not in those lands today. They're not ruling. They're not running anything. And if there happen to be a sprinkle of them around there somewhere on those regions, they don't make a difference because they're not running things. Esau took over those lands. You see? When did Turkey get its name? The English name Turkey for the country originates from the term land of the Turks, which was used to describe the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire were Edomites, so-called white people, Turco-Edomites. Even those Khazars, the small hats, they were labeled by Eustace Mullins, which we never spoke to Eustace Mullins. He said that small hats are Turco-Edomites. And he's right. They are Edomites, but they weren't Turco because there's no such thing as a Turco people. That's just a name that was given to them later. Just like you have no such thing as Chinese people, white people, Japanese people. Those are all labels that were put on people later. That's a part of that covering cast over all people. Let's get that real quick. Let's go to Isaiah 25:7. And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people. What is that covering that was cast over all people? The lies that Esau put upon these people, the labels of these different peoples today, because all people on the planet Earth, somehow, shape, or form, go all the way back to Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Bottom line. And if Ron Dalton don't believe that, then he don't believe in the scriptures. All peoples on the planet Earth today go back to the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, or Japheth. So when we read in the table, so-called table of nations, we don't read Chinese. You don't read white people. You don't read black people. You don't read African. You don't read, Arab or anything of that sort. They are there by their ancient names. So if they don't have their ancient names today, then how do you know who's who? Well, archaeological research and, DNA and whose fucking DNA do they have? Do they have, did they pull up the bones of Japheth and go into his bones and take out some DNA samples and matched it to the so-called white man? You people crack me up with that DNA bullshit. Oh, well, their DNA says that they are so and so and such. But whose DNA do they have? Do they have Cush's DNA? Is Cush, do they have Cush propped up in some laboratory where they, using samples of his tissue to find out who's a Cushite and who's not? Anyways. And the veil that is spread over all nations. So the Lord is removing all of that out of the way. So going back here, this phrase, Turkiya, in medieval Latin, and later on, I forgot what year it was changed from Turkey to Turkiya. Medieval Latin referred to the region inhabited by the Turkic people. That's why it's called Turkey today. It wasn't called Turkey back then. It was known as Anatolia. It says, and then prior to that, it was known as, one of the lands of Japheth. The word Turk itself, meaning strong or flourishing, is of unknown origin, but has been used in various languages to refer to people from the region. All right, now, I also typed in, what year did Anatolia become Turkey? Anatolia became predominantly Turkish through a gradual process over several centuries. Not a single year. The process began with the Seljuk conquest in the 11th century, right? The Seljuks, these were Ottoman Turks, all right? I forget, because I did research on that, but that's back in the early 90s, mid 90s, and I believe that's like a term, like a sultan or something like that, or it could be the people, a certain sect of these people that were known as the Seljuk, which was the Ottoman Empire. I haven't gone over that history in so long. I don't fully remember it. But it says the process began with the Seljuk conquest in the 11th century, see, and continued through the Ottoman Empire with the formal establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. Right? 1922, Turkish tribes created the Ottoman Empire in Anatolia, and it grew to be one of the most powerful states in the world during the 15th and 16th century. What are the 15th century? That's the 1400s. What happened in the 1400s? Let's see. The Ottoman period spanned more than 600 years and came to an end in 1922 when it was replaced by the Turkish Republic. Now, let's see what happened. Let's see if we type in what happened. What happened in, there we go. Look at that. What happened in 1453? In 1453, the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mehmed II, captured Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire. This event marked a significant turning point in history, ushering in the Ottoman era and signaling the end of the Roman Empire in the East. You see? So the people that are in this land today that look so-called white, those Turkish people, they are not Israelites. They are not Japhetic people. They are Edomites. Now, some of them, their line, depending on where their line goes back, some of them might go back to Japheth. Some of them might go back to, Ham. Some of them might go back to Israel. And that's what the angel is going to do when they come back and sort everything out. Because, unbeknownst that not every so-called white-looking person is an Edomite. You have these boneheads out there that push that. You have some Israelites that have mingled with Edomite women and have babies that look like Edomites, but those are Israelite babies. There's no such thing as a half-breed, a mixed race, a 1/16th, whatever. No, none of that bullshit. It's either what you are, what your father is. If your father's a so-called Negro, then you would be a so-called Negro. You would be of the tribe of Judah, or Benjamin, or Levi, or whatever other tribe. You see? And then I'm not sure, because I didn't finish. I did listen to the video that the elder pastor sent me, and I had to go back and listen to it to find out if Ron Dalton, right, was saying that those people that are there today, the small hats, are going to be persecuted, by the Russians, or by Gog. I don't know if he believes that Gog are the Russians, whatever the case may be. All right. So with that, I pray that your brothers and few sisters have been edified. Look, the people of Japheth, those are brown-skinned people. Look up pictures of the Etruscans. Look up pictures of the Minoan people. And when you see the Minoans, you see them looking just like, with the wavy, curly, long hair, like those Polynesian people. And then when you look at the pictures, that's art. And in some of those depictions, you have some white-looking individuals in there. Now, why are they that way? Was some of them white and some of them brown? No. In Minoan art, the white painted characters, were distinguished from the brown painted ones, because the white painted ones were the women. And that's how they were able to distinguish between the two. Outside of the breast, of course, but that's how they would, in Minoan art, because the men and the women both had long, wavy, flowing hair. So to distinguish them in art, they would make the men brown and they would make the women look so-called white. But they were all brown-skinned people. All right. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.